Foreign Policy Research at SETA Foundation. This is our first public event in this new building. We moved in just a few months ago, so we are still trying to settle down. Hopefully we will continue with events of this kind in the future as well. Today we will be discussing a hot topic which is on the agenda everywhere, on the agenda of the politicians, the media, policymakers and also intellectuals. The title of our panel is The New Middle East and the Turkish Foreign Policy. The New Middle East suggests that there is now an emerging Middle East which is different from the previous constructed Middle East. Of course, when we talk about the new Middle East, it contrasts with the old Middle East. So I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we all observe that fundamental changes are taking place in our region, which Turkey cannot turn a blind eye. So Turkish foreign policy is also being shaped in reaction to these events. Today we have three well-known speakers who are prolific writers and well-known intellectuals in these fields. We will start off with Bill Park from London University, King's College. I think he will focus on more Turkish foreign policy side. Then we will move on to Taha Özhan, director of SETA. And the last speaker will be Professor Muhammad Eyüp from Michigan State University, who is a well-known expert on Muslim affairs as well as political developments in the Muslim world. And he is also closely following what's going on in Turkey and in the region as well. We are happy to have them here. As I say, this is the first public event and we are very lucky to have them with us and you as well. Each speaker will have 20 minutes. Then we will have at the end a question and answer session. Hopefully we will have interesting presentations. We will start off with you, Bill. Please, go ahead. We have 20 minutes.
Is that on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank SETA for inviting me to come here and speak in this wonderful building. I've never been here before. I visited the old previous building, and I have to say this at first appearance, it looks very much like an improvement. And I'd like to thank you all for coming. What I'm going to do is I've been asked to talk about Turkish foreign policy and the Arab Spring, and the things that I want to say about Turkey require me first of all to give my analysis of the Arab Spring. So I hope I don't overlap with the other two speakers. I may do. I don't think that will be a problem because I'm sure we will have different perspectives and there will be many questions. I think so far the way in which we've been looking at the Arab Spring has been in the context that in some ways journalists have set for us. In other words, we've been very excited by the rapidity and the drama of events, and we've accepted that framework in the way in which we've looked at the Arab Spring. I think the role of an analyst or an academic, which is what I am, is to stand back a little bit and to try to make sense or try to identify larger lessons, if you like, from these developments. So I don't want to focus on the drama and the exciting nature of the events, although they certainly are that. I want to try to look at the bigger picture. The problem in doing that is that my probably native pessimism or cynicism comes to the fore. I don't know if you have in Turkish an expression that in English we call it, or British English we call it a party pooper. This is somebody who arrives at a party where everybody's enjoying everybody's company, they're laughing at each other's jokes, they're enjoying the food, they're in a good mood, and somebody arrives with a long face, and he complains of a headache, and he doesn't really see what everybody's so happy about, and the food is bad, and there isn't enough drink. You know, this kind of person. Well, I'm that kind of person, because the things I have to say are not entirely optimistic or not entirely positive. But just one warning, I'm not trying to make predictions. In fact, I think it's quite wrong and impossible to make predictions. It's simply that my balance of assessment, my balance of analysis does not easily lead me to positive conclusions either about the development in the region, or about the prospects for Turkey as a consequence of those developments. But these are not predictions. I might be wrong indeed. I very much hope I'm totally wrong. But I just fear that might not be the case. So why have I presented myself as a party pooper, as the miserable guy who comes in and spoils everybody's fun? First of all, I think we're calling this thing the Arab Spring, but actually it isn't one thing. There's lots of different countries that have gone through lots of different experiences in the last year or so. And in fact, I think it's quite difficult to generalise. You might say that you have an Arab Spring, a spring in Tunisia, but what we have in Syria is not a spring at all. It's really quite awful. And indeed, we might say in Syria that the winter is already arrived, or at least arriving. Even in Libya, this has been a very nasty and unpleasant war that has taken place. And just this morning, I saw BBC News reporting an Amnesty International report commenting on the mistreatment of detainees by the transitional government forces against their captured pro-Gaddafi fighters. So it seems to me we shouldn't generalise too much. There are lots of different experiences across Arab countries. Some countries have had no seasonal change at all. Barely anything has happened. So we've had positive developments, negative developments, and anywhere in between. So that's one thing I think we need to say. It's not a single phenomenon. And that means that the outcomes might be various as well. Very different events are taking place in many different Arab countries. We might see many different developments emerge from that. The second observation I would make is that we talk about spring as if it's the green shoots of something new and positive, the sign that summer is coming, something better is coming. We talk about the pro-democracy movement. There's certainly pro-democracy forces as parts of the Arab Spring in at least some of these countries, but not exclusively so. And indeed, some of the forces behind what we're calling the Arab Spring might not, in any easy and direct way, lead to democratic outcomes. We have, for example, tribal forces, you might say pre-modern forces in Yemen, in Libya, that are behind the developments there, amongst others. We have confessional differences, for example, in Bahrain, to some extent. This was a conflict between a Shia majority and a Sunni minority regime. There's an element of confessional difference in Syria as well. It's hard for me to work out how important that is in the Syrian events, but there's something about it. The Sunni majority resisting an Alawite ruling elite. And also, the recent incident with the Coptic Christians reminds us that in Egypt too there are confessional differences, that what has happened there might not necessarily improve. It could be that what we will see is something getting worse. So we have confessional factors behind some of these things we're calling the Arab Spring. We also have, as another phenomenon, straight opportunism. People who were part of the old regime have gone over to the new regime. Sometimes because they've seen a genuine opening, an opportunity to do better and be better. But sometimes as well, I think, a much narrower kind of opportunism. As we called it, rats jumping from sinking ships. They've seen which way the wind is blowing, what side their bread in the future might be buttered, then they've moved to that. So we've seen in the transition government of Libya remnants of the old regime. What we see in Egypt is definitely a remnant of the old regime. Even in Yemen, you've had some, Syria to a lesser extent, soldiers that have gone over to the new forces. And I'm not sure that one can easily look at these opportunistic people, I don't wish to be negative or even particularly generalise about them, and say in an exclusive, unqualified way, these are pro-democracy forces. And then clearly this is something that certainly worries the West, or some people in the West. You have conservative, Islamic, I don't know what language to use, people disagree over how to use their language, fundamentalist, however we want to describe them, forces of that nature as well, behind some of what has happened in the Arab world. And that too isn't easily going to lead to the outbreak of democracy in this region. So then I think we need to look at some of the forces behind the Arab Spring and ask ourselves whether it's right to think of it necessarily as a spring or, even more to the point, necessarily as pro-democracy. The third general sort of negative set of observations I'll make is democracy is not easy. If I take the European example or my own country's example, it can take centuries to emerge. Indeed, democracy isn't just going to the ballot box and voting. What we understand as democracy consists of lots of other developments as well. So, for example, before countries like my own became what you might describe as fully fledged democracies, even then I'm not sure, a lot of other things happened as well. We had the emergence of civil institutions, trade unions, business groups, lobby groups, universities, that were quite independent of the state. We had the separation of church and state, of religion and state, and the secularisation of society and politics. We had improved governance, clean water, better roads, better housing, the beginnings of healthcare, less corruption, more accountability. We had an expanded scope for intellectual and artistic freedom, and a growing attachment to the right of individual liberties. We had the development of legal systems that were independent of the state, impartial, and able to protect the rights of individuals and groups, sometimes against the state. And of course we had economic development. Democracy came, to a degree, hand in glove with economic development, the Industrial Revolution, and so on. Rising living standards, a more educated and literate population. And all of those processes took place either before or alongside the emergence of democracy. And I don't think you can understand the developed democracies without referring to those developments, as well as what takes place on election day. And it isn't clear to me that those sorts of developments, that sort of evolution, has reached very far in the Arab world. Indeed, UN Index of Human Development puts much of the Arab world, which is often written by Arab intellectuals, puts much of the Arab world towards the bottom end on a global scale of many of these developments. Now, if you make the assumption, and we can question it, but if you make the assumption that these developments are necessary preconditions for the emergence of democracy, then you have to say that a great deal of the Arab world has not yet fully developed, or in some cases even embarked upon, those necessary preconditions for democratization. So, it might be that the tolerance or the bipartisanship or the good governance or the honest government or rule of law that we associate with democracy is really very, very difficult in the Arab world, notwithstanding the events of the last months and couple of years. And then a sort of final negative observation is that revolts and revolutions often end in tears. What they produce is not democracy but counter-revolution. As a student of European history when I was at school, 1848 was the year of revolutions, but it didn't actually change much for the good in Europe. It produced counter-revolutions, forces of reaction that repressed the ideals of the revolutionary forces. And there are many instances of that, both in general across Europe, but also specifically in some countries. So, for example, the French Revolution produced nationalism and militarism, as well as elements of democracy. The 1917 revolution in Russia, which started off quite participatory and democratic, produced repressive communist rule. So when we look at the Arab world, we can see, just as we've seen in other parts of the world in past histories, that revolt might not necessarily lead to democracy. The forces of, if you like, reaction or counter-revolution might be strong. Tunisia is perhaps the most hopeful, and then there's a sort of sliding scale down the list. So where does all this negative, pessimistic consideration leave Turkey? First of all, I think one of the considerations that we have to at least ask ourselves is whether Turkey's future, its image, its impact on the region is primarily in the hands of Turkey itself, or primarily in the hands of the Arab peoples or the other peoples of the region. So much might depend on how the Arab world perceives Turkey, and I want to have a look at that. It's certainly the case, it's self-evidently the case, I mean you can see it just walking around the streets here, that Turkey is far more developed politically, economically, socially, intellectually country than is much of the Arab world. And this in itself is clearly attractive. Whether that makes it a model for an inspiration for political developments in those countries is another matter, but clearly Turkey is in a different category. And I suppose one of the arguments I might at least try out on you is that that might become one of Turkey's problems. That actually it's so different that it will be looked on not as a brother nation, but as a different kind of nation. As actually a country more similar in some ways to the West than to the Arab world. Again, that's a thought. It's not what I really believe in, but it seems to me there's a possibility. So let me just explore that a little bit. One thing we might have to say about Turkey is that its evolution, certainly since 1923, is really quite unique, and it's hard to see how it can be replicated. A senior Egyptian once said to me that the difference between Turkey and Egypt was Kemal Atatürk. It's kind of superficial analysis. I don't think he meant it to be his full analysis. But it's an interesting observation that Turkey took certain routes that has taken it to a different place. And many Arab countries have, to some degree, or even almost entirely, not had that kind of experience. Then you have the problem of the Turkish model. Well, the problem with the Turkish model is even Turks don't agree on what the Turkish model is. Is it a Muslim democracy? Is it a secular democracy? Is it something that's the fruits of decades of military guardianship? You know, something that could only have evolved under military supervision, if I can put it that way. I think the Turkish Prime Minister was correct in distinguishing, on his visit recently to Egypt and other North African, Middle Eastern countries, I think he was correct to distinguish between secular political systems as a sort of ordering of a political system and a legal basis for those systems, on the one hand, and the religious society on the other. But it was also clear from Egypt and elsewhere that not everybody was entirely pleased with that distinction. Some people in the Arab world, including some people behind the Arab Spring, are not really ready for a secular political system that threatens to remove to the more private sphere the role of religion. Even in Tunisia, again, just reading this morning that the secular parties are concerned about the Ennahda movement, that it might turn back progress that has, before the Arab Spring, been made in Tunisia towards secular or modern political systems. So you can see there the scope of difference and so on. So Egypt, for example, might, and Syria too, might acquire a version of a Turkish model, but it might be one that puts in place military guardianship over future political developments. In other words, a Turkish model that Turkey itself is moving away from and rejecting. But this might be where some of the movements in the Arab world find the most relevant parts of the Turkish experience, not Turkey now, but Turkey as it has evolved over hundreds of years. So in this sense, Turkey might, when it talks to the Middle East about democratization, secular political systems and all the rest of it, it might look quite a lot like a Western country talking about development, economic development, democracy, and less like the country that has had experiences that are comparable to those of the Arab world. Another observation to make, and this is difficult to make, and I hesitate to make it, sitting in Turkey, but my flight back is already booked, so I think I can escape quickly. You know, I'm British, I could be French, and I would say the same thing. We also had strong relationships with the Arab world, by no means entirely positive, but if I just take Britain, British universities, private schools, military training establishments, I work in a military training establishment, its financial sector, even whole neighbourhoods in my home city of London, are very, very influenced by Arabs. So many Jordanians, Gulf Arabs, Saudis experience democratization and development through places like Britain. For Algerians, for Moroccans, for Tunisians, they experience democratic models, democratization, economic development and all the rest of it through France. And of course also many through the United States. It's not entirely positive, but I suppose what I'm saying here, and this is why I feel slightly awkward about saying it, but I believe it, so I have to say it, is that even if people in the Arab world look around for models of modernity and democratization, what Turkey brings is perhaps a message that so long as people will look on Turkey as a primarily Muslim society, a more welcome source of that message. But it does not bring a better example of democracy or modernity or secularization or whatever else that can be found elsewhere. So it does require people to say it isn't so much democratization as the fact that Turkey has managed to pull off the trick that is attractive. And I don't know that we can be sure that this is the way all our populations will look at it. They might say, well, if we want to be democratic, let's look for the really developed examples. If we want to move on economically, let's look for those places where economic development has taken further. The Turkish foreign policy, where does this leave us? Well, Turkey surely has been absolutely correct under the present government in adopting a neighbourhood policy. Its readiness to open up to the immediate neighbourhood. I don't particularly like the term zero problems with the neighbours, because the neighbours have so many problems with each other that it seems to me an impossibility. But a positive, proactive, constructive neighbourhood policy, I think that's what Turkey has embarked upon, and I think that's been an entirely positive departure for Turkey. However, what Turkey has done, I would say, is, I didn't think this at the time, so this is with the benefits of hindsight, what I think Turkey has done is embraced regimes in a perhaps over-brotherly sort of way, and suspended the thought that some of those regimes are very repressive of their own people. And so what I think you saw is the Turkish foreign policy makers being caught on the hop a bit. At what point do we drop Gaddafi or Assad and embrace the people? Now, this is not a cheap shot at Turkey. None of us have handled this very well. It's impossible to handle it very well. But Turkey went further in making overtures to regimes in the region that are really quite repressive and have now been challenged. And you saw some of the reaction to that, for example, amongst the Libyan population, where there were demonstrations outside the Turkish embassy and against Turks, because the Turkey had seemed to stay on side with Gaddafi for longer than the Libyan resistance thought was desirable. So there's a kind of difficult problem that Turkey might have to deal with in the future. One is that the remaining dictators might come to regard Turkey as someone that used to be a friend and moved away from them, and Assad has more or less said that. It's not me that's changed, it's Prime Minister Erdogan, which is something he said. But also there will be many dictators in the region anyway who will look around and think, when Turkey embraces us, be careful, because at the first sign of gunshot, they might change sides. There might be, not a prediction but a thought, elements of the population of some of these countries where they have overthrown dictators, where populations might be sceptical about Turkey's embrace of democracy, precisely because Turkey embraced the pre- or anti-democratic regimes in such a fulsome and brotherly kind of way. In more detail, it seems to me Turkey might have to deal with the fact that, one, some of the regimes might stay in power. It's not at all clear to me that Assad will be overthrown, at least for the time being. This is going to be a very difficult foreign policy problem for Turkey. That links, along with other things, with Turkey's relationship with Iran, which I think is about to enter a period of difficulty, partly because of Turkey's position, if you like, towards elements of the Arab Spring. And also the people that Turkey is embracing, as I've indicated, might in fact produce more nationalistic, Arabist regimes. This could happen in Egypt, resenting the Turkish influence, more religiously conservative, or more tribalistic regimes that are not much like Turkey. So there is, at least as a final point, at least a possibility, and please bear in mind I'm not making a prediction, but I'm teasing out a line of analysis that as a party pooper and a natural pessimist I'm drawn towards. It seems to me that Turkey could easily look like a former imperial, non-Arab, economically overbearing and Western regime come to lecture the locals about democracy when the locals themselves either don't quite manage to achieve it or are not necessarily attracted to it. And this could leave Turkey looking as stranded, or even more so if these developments turn out to be correct, than Western countries who at least did not have such friendly relationships with countries like Syria, Gaddafi, and so on and so forth. Okay, we'll stop there. I hope we can go over time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this interesting but also disturbing, let's say, questions and remarks, but you don't have to leave Turkey as soon as you finish. We can coordinate this. There are a few things that I want to mention before I move on to Taha. Whether Turkey can be a model or not, this was one of the questions. Yes, nobody's using this term, model, because it is fixed, it is not changing, so it is not something that really we should prefer. But we might look at some kind of sources of inspiration. And he said, Bill said that there are some examples for the Arab countries like the United States, Britain, or France, that they can get inspiration as far as democratization or rule of law is concerned. But I think in the minds of Muslim countries, Muslim people, or in the minds of Arabs, these countries are associated with the status quo in that region. The Arab dictatorships or authoritarian regimes kept their place largely because of the support that they received from, I think, from some of these countries. And why Turkey is important is not because of Turkish, I think, democracy only, or Turkish laicism or secularism and economic development only. I think we should look at it on a more broader framework, which is, Turkey is predominantly a Muslim country, and more importantly, in the last 10 years, Turkey is ruled by a conservative government. I think that is what makes Turkey much more interesting for the Arab elite or for the Arab people, because they are thinking that, they are looking at Turkey, a predominantly Muslim country, ruled by so-called Islamists or conservative government, but still they can manage to go ahead with democratization, establishing civil democracy relations, economic development. So a Muslim country with Muslim rulers, in a sense, can achieve some of the things that the modern Western societies achieve. I think that's what makes Turkey maybe a more interesting case. Yes, there are some other questions and things that I need to address, but I think I'll leave it to the question and answer session, because from the audience I think there will be some questions. Now I am to move on to Taha. Taha, floor is yours. But there will be some technical problems, because this is the first time we are using this place.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, I would like to first lay out a little bit about which Turkey are we talking about, then which Arab Spring. Later, I'll try to explain a little bit about how Turkey is affecting Arab Spring. But also, there's another issue which is usually not being touched, how Arab Spring is being shaped in Turkey. And lastly, I'll try to talk about the other actors who are somehow involved in those transformations. First of all, last decade, Turkey has been experiencing a tremendous amount of changes, and these changes are structural. And with partial constitutional amendment in 2010, September 12, Turkey had our threshold, and we were able to pass that threshold in the way through democratization. And that structural changes created, which is being called right now, the new Turkey. And since then we are having several debates where we're comparing or showing a dichotomy between old Turkey and the new Turkey. And it can be said that what Turkey has been gone through right now, Middle East and North Africa, just started and showed the signs that they may go through. But it's too early to make any comment on that, I believe. And that's why it's too early, even when we're naming what's happening in the Middle East and North Africa. That's why, I don't know who invented, but this Arab Spring thing is the perfect name. Because rather than calling it structural transformation, change, or the extreme form, the revolution, which I haven't seen yet. On domestic front, as I said, Turkey got through with many shortages, but very big structural democratization steps. But at the international front, Turkey also took too many steps and initiatives. Simply, I don't want to get into detail, most of you are aware of it, they were proactive. this is not being that we have experienced in the old Turkey. This is a phenomenon of new Turkey, being a very proactive in foreign policy. And what's this Arab Spring then? First of all, it will be misleading to interpret what's been happening in the Arab world as a single isolated development in each and every country. What is at stake is a region where defining features of regional countries, ranging from their names to their borders, all of them almost, were determined by Western powers right after the First World War. And some kind of regional order established after those bloody interventions in 1990, 10, 20, and right after 1948, which is at the wake of the Second World War, there was another order established over there based on the establishment of Israel. This revised post-World War II order is restructured and updated in 1978, which I call it Camp David order. And since then, we've been living into this Camp David order. And this new arrangement, based on Western support for Arab leaders, and has dominated Middle East affairs for the last 3 decades. And in this order, status quo positioned Israel at the center of regional relations, and in subsequent years it was enabled regional dictators to rule with iron fist. We can characterize and try to understand this order in 2 significant features. On the one hand, U.S. situated itself between Israel and the Arab countries, and on the other hand, local dictators positioned themselves between U.S. and the Arab peoples in order to compensate any complaint, uprising, and possible threat to Camp David order. And this unsustainable arrangement came to an end, this is a claim actually, following the invasion of Iraq. The U.S. invasion, intentionally or unintentionally, agitated the dynamics of regional order or status quo. In other words, in the post-9/11 era, reactionary neocon policies led to fall of Saddam, which in effect triggered political tsunami whose true implications will be observed in coming years. Surely it will be wrong to consider occupation of Iraq as the sole mover of what's happening in the Arab world, because even if Saddam had not been overthrown, dictatorships in Arab world, they didn't have much oil to run their car, while people's expectations are getting higher and higher. But what happened was, right after occupation of Iraq, ethnic sectarian lines are agitated, and it had really and structural effect throughout the region. And also, Saddam is gone, and entire regional politics is agitated. Everybody tried to move and fill the vacuum, and this definitely affected people. But as I said, even that occupation did not take place. The Arab people was feeling the huge pressure on them. To understand that, they used 2 significant slogans throughout the Arab Spring. The first one was bread, freedom, and the dignity. And the other one was the people demand the fall of the order. I think these 2 slogans are quite enough to understand how much people demanded change within the Arab and North African region. Here, I mean, this is interesting. In Arabic also, the order, the translation is the exact translation. People were quite aware of what's happening is not a single-out event in their country. They knew there is an order which is protecting and providing what's happening within their country. So they used, I believe, this slogan. And in broader terms, that debate on order just started and it will continue to deepen. And as dictators in Arab world fall one after another, the new regional order is in the making process right now. So if I arrive to the effect of Turkey on the Arab Spring, this is the background, and Turkey was able to act within these dimensions of the background. And if the invasion of Iraq is a quite important event, what's happening today, Turkey was the only country who rejected participating in Iraq's invasion, and which at the same time triggered several political implementations throughout the region. Right before the occupation of Iraq, Turkey intensified its relations with neighboring countries. At that time, it wasn't put with too much importance, but Turkey was able to somehow form the conference called Neighboring Countries Conference. It was, at that time, almost a useless thing, but it was a new thing for Turkey. The first time, after a long time, Turkey was able to have interactive relations with its neighbors, intensified its bureaucracy to reach out neighboring countries, and that platform provided Turkey to reach out its sources. And they created, after this neighboring countries conference, within that framework, the zero problem policy since 2002, I think, which helped too much Turkey to reach out to those countries, as Bill Park explained. That relations was not just state-to-state relations. At the same time, when state was intensifying its relations this much, NGOs, universities, media, everybody was, one way or another, having some links in the Arab world to get through. At the same time, Turkey did not just operate it over this neighboring countries conference or zero problem thing, but at the same time, Turkey was positively participated in the resolution and discussion of every single major issues which is being usually named Arab issue. The Palestinian issue is the first one, and Turkey's harsh criticism of Israel right after occupation of Gaza and the war on Lebanon. And later, all you know, this famous scene of the Davos was the critical point where Turkey was able to reach out not only Palestinians but entire region. And right after the massacre in Mavi Marmara by Israeli attack, it was the moment where Israel again unintentionally helped Turkey to pass another threshold to strengthen its relations with entire region. Because after that thing, Turkish-Arab relations transformed irrevocably, and there was no point of going back. In the same way, Turkey vetoed UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, a non-Arab country. As a member of Security Council, Turkey showed that reaction, although there was a huge pressure. And the perception of Turkey as a country that resists to external impositions gained strength. To understand Turkey's effect, I'm just listing what was happened last 8-9 years. If I go back to those two slogans, bread, freedom and dignity, and the people is asking for fall of the order or the regime, they are really symbolic and at the same time explaining everything. I mean, by bread, people are asking simply economic development and change of the economic inequalities. Turkey is a country which has almost no oil revenues or energy resources, the biggest economy in the region, and consistent economic development actually has many things to tell about this bread part of the slogan. Freedom, basically notifying democratization. Turkey was getting through every other year another huge democratic steps, although, as I said, there are shortages. And the dignity part is the showing a stance against external imposition, and that took place several times, starting by rejecting being part of the occupation of Iraq. And asking for the fall of the order is another thing. I mean, Turkey was being mentioned in every single international platform asking about change in the UN, several times mentioning about global imbalances and etc. These are all having what? Direct relations with Turkey. And definitely the issue of Israel. Another important issue, the effect of Arab Spring on Turkey, which is usually ignored, because this is quite interesting. Just as Turkey had a role in transformation of Arab world, also Arab world has a significant role of the formation of the new Turkey. First of all, as I explained, the relations are tremendously increased. Intensive business relations, civil society relations, intellectual relations, etc. As a result, while Middle East was not at all included at the agenda of all Turkey, right now it is being treated as a not only an ordinary issue, but also as a domestic issue. Just watch our Turkish media. It's one of the top headlines of Turkish people's interest right now. Even though the media, state institutions, NGOs and universities still have not overcome the mixed feelings created by adoption of Latin alphabet, because it was a big trauma for Turkey. But right now they are reintroduced themselves to Arabic language. In an illustrative example, this is important if you know about Turkey a little bit. Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan and Foreign Minister started to have their meetings in Arabic, in Libya, in Egypt. But this time it's interesting because if we were in old Turkey, let's say in 1990s, this could be easily a point to show huge secularist reaction. Rather than this time the media and the bureaucracy watched the direct impact with an envy. To get a better sense of implications of this development, we can compare 1996 Erbakan's visit to North Africa and Arab world and Erdogan's latest visit to North Africa and the Middle East. Erbakan's visit was almost a reason which played an important role during the February 28, 1997 coup d'etat. And military showed huge reaction, media criticized harshly, while Erdogan had his visits through these countries with military accompanying him, and media is welcoming, even maybe exaggerating. So these are showing what? There are structural changes happening within Turkey. Time after time, day after day, the Arab Spring is getting into also Turkey. State institutions, bureaucracy, civil society, businessmen are trying to readjust themselves vis-à-vis what's happening in the Arab world. But it's also forcing Turkey to rethink about the social imagination of their past. Somehow historical imaginations are coming back, popping up. The best-selling books are somehow related to that part of history. And the linkages and the bridges are being established day after day. But at the same time, while these important events are taking place, another important thing, a shortage is coming out, which is a lack of capacity to reaching out all these different dimensions. Media is feeling that there's a huge lack of capacity, knowledge about Arab world, Arabic, what's happening over there, native informants, etc., etc. Bureaucracy is in hurry to keep up, having what Arabic-speaking people, establishing offices over there, etc., etc. So there is a huge Arab countries, Arab world, Arabic, whatever, related capacity improvement process taking place right now. But at the same time, there is a huge interaction is happening. I don't know how many meetings we had just in this institution regarding the Arab world and how many times we invited Arab friends, intellectuals, journalists to speak here. Also, for example, we're publishing Inside Turkey journal. In just 2 months, we will be publishing in Arabic. Al Jazeera was one of the most important mover of what's happening over there. Al Jazeera Turkey is going to be broadcast in Turkey. So relations are really getting intensified. Some cases.
You have 1 minute.
Yes, I know. I would like to talk about a little bit Israel and the US, because they have directly relations with this region, and their position will define what will happen in the future of Arab Spring. I think it's quite clear. I mean, US is trying to first of all, they do not want to pay any price by being resembled or showed as the one who's obstacle against Arab Spring. I think this is a very intelligent move by Obama administration. I think they compared the cost of being staying against the change and supporting the change. That comparison provided them, let's support, but let's control it. Because the change itself, one way or another, at the end, will put an end to Camp David order. Meaning, this time there will be no Mubarak, there will be no Bin Ali, maybe there will be no Assad. To compensate within the Camp David order, as they did, whatever happens over there at the expense of the people. So meaning, US will directly face to people's demand without having any proxy puppet actors over there. So this is the dilemma. I think this is the question of the next decades. The US is struggling to tackle with this question. And the good thing is they know they should not prevent or they should not be obstacle for the changes. This is good. But the problem of Israel is another thing, and I don't have time to explain it. Just one word, one sentence. Israel is one of the two actors who openly and bluntly explained and declared that they are against this change. Remember, when the uprising was happening in Egypt, Saudi Arabia was the first, Israel was the second to declare that they are against this change. Because they knew very well this change at the end will force Camp David order either will revise or structurally it's going to be demolished. So Israel has to make its decision at this intersection. They can no longer sustain an order which is already being out of date, and they can no longer be geographically part of this region but mentally live in another capital. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Taha. I think you used two important, in my view, one is metaphorical term, you said political tsunami. In fact, this political tsunami has been taking place, and as Bill Park said, we are not sure what will be the direction, but we are hoping that it will be a positive direction. And of course, regional order is being challenged by this political tsunami, which has some implications for the domestic policies of the countries concerned and also for the regional balance of power, especially the Israeli case. I think you have mentioned this in the last part of your presentation. Thank you very much. And now we move on to the last speaker, Mohammed Ayub from Michigan State University. That is, Mohammed Ayub is English pronunciation. Mehmet Ayub is the Turkish pronunciation. That's he told me actually today. So I present him as Mehmet Ayub, Professor Ayub. Please.
Thank you. I'd also like to first of all thank SETA for inviting me to this panel, and particularly Talib Hoja for allowing me to be a participant in this panel. Being the last speaker on a panel has certain disadvantages and certain advantages as well. The disadvantages are that much of what you want to say might have already been said. The advantage is that you can comment on some things that have been said. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin with a comment on something that Bill Park mentioned or implied, but I hope that would not be held against 20 minutes that I have for my major presentation. My presentation which I was quickly trying to reorder or rewrite after Professor Kujikjan's opening statement, will focus on issues of change and of continuity as a result or related to what is called popularly the Arab Spring. But I'll come to that in a moment. But I noticed, and this is just in a couple of minutes, I noticed that Will Park's remarks at some point implied that there was a dichotomy, and maybe and this is despite the disclaimers that he added on, that there's a dichotomy between being a secular democracy and a predominantly Muslim state with Muslim societal values. This is one of the canards that has been spread, particularly in the Western press and by analysts and even by some academics, not some, quite a large number of academics with vested interests in professional advancement. But I'd like to point out that Turkey demonstrates very clearly that you can have a predominantly Muslim secular democracy, and that there is no dichotomy between being Muslim on the one hand and secular democratic on the other, and that the values of the secular state can be reconciled with Muslim societal values. Sorry,
now it's on now.
Yeah, okay. With Muslim societal values. And I think you find this, as I said, of late, in the last couple of years in particular, there were, in the Western press, you find these references, rather mischievous ones. Every time Prime Minister Erdogan is mentioned or the AK Party is mentioned, it's always the adjective, the Islamist Prime Minister, or the party with Islamist roots that rules over Turkey. Nobody talks about the born-again Christian George W. Bush, who was the President of the United States for 8 years, or the evangelically driven American foreign policy towards the Middle East, particularly on the issue of Israel and Palestine. So there is a deliberate attempt, and what's most interesting is that while some people did use this earlier on, these adjectives, it certainly became very popular in the American press after the Davos incident, in which Prime Minister Erdogan walked out on President Shimon Peres. So one last word. I mean, the way the societies are defined, Muslim societies are defined as becoming fundamentalist. I think the prime example of that was provided by the person whom I call the leading font of superficial knowledge, namely Tom Friedman. And some of you might have, in fact, read this his article some year or two ago in the New York Times, in which he visited, he said, Fatih in Istanbul, and he saw lots of people going to the mosque for prayer because it was prayer time. And he said, my God, Turkey has become fundamentalist. I mean, if you go to a mosque at prayer time or go to a church where there is a service and see people going into the church or the mosque or the synagogue for prayer and come to the conclusion that Turkey or the United States or Israel or whatever have become fundamentalists, then then good luck to you. So it's that sort of analysis that has been pervading the Western press, and I think some parts of Western academia as well. But be that as may, now to my 20 minutes. The Arab Spring, as Professor Kujikjan pointed out...
45 minutes is left, sir.
Pardon?
45 minutes, out of that 20 minutes is left, so don't worry. As Professor Kujikjan pointed out, we have to demonstrate both elements of change and continuity. And I'd like to emphasize some elements of change and some of continuity, and relate it also to some extent with Turkish foreign policy, though in an indirect way. I think the major demonstration of change, at least particularly in terms of perceptions of change outside the Arab world, about the Arab world, was the explosion of this myth that the Arabs in particular, but the Muslims in general, were driven by certain religio-cultural characteristics that made them innately undemocratic. There were all these religio-cultural explanations that were given about the democracy deficit in the Muslim world. And I used to always tell my interlocutors that it's not a democracy deficit in the Muslim world, but in particular in the Arab component of the Muslim world, and for very specific domestic and even more important international reasons. But also, please understand that Arabs form only 20% of the Muslim population on this planet. But even that 20% has now demonstrated quite clearly that the values that they cherish in terms of freedom, and Professor Ozan mentioned this, in terms of freedom and liberty and economic opportunities, are no different from those of other people around the world. The other myth that was excluded, and again it's one of perceptual change that is beginning, I think, to seep in, although there is a resistance to accept this, is the myth of the Islamist monolith that was going to take over the Arab world once pro-Western dictatorships fall. And this was what the Arab dictators like Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, or Abdullah II of Jordan, or the octogenarians ruling Saudi Arabia, even had always tried to sell to Washington that after us the deluge, because you see all these bearded people, and the Saudis are bearded, all sides of the spectrum are bearded, but that these bearded people are waiting in the wings to take over. And what the events of the last 10 months or so in the Arab world have demonstrated, first is that when the democratic uprisings took place, the Islamist groups, although they joined the movements, were not initially the leading forces in that movement. There was a wide array of social forces that came together almost spontaneously when the barrier of fear was broken to demand that the old regimes must fall, the regime must go. And while the Islamist parties like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt or Al-Nahda in Tunisia were a part of that process, they were initially not the leading one, and I don't think they are even now the leading, well, Al-Nahda probably is, the leading forces in the process of transformation. The other thing that related to this point that was demonstrated was that when democratic openings take place, Islamist movements or parties that appear to be monolithic, as long as there are autocrats in power who suppress all opposition, but who are unable to suppress the only one that has certain advantages of having avenues of communication, like the religious idiom or the mosque and so on and so forth, they give this appearance of being a monolith and larger than life-size monolith. Once democratic openings take place, and Egypt is a prime example of this now, they begin to fracture. You see and I must say so even if I say so, that in 2008 I published a book called The Many Faces of Political Islam, in which I had said in the conclusion that once democratic openings take place, two things will happen to the Islamist movements. One, they would fracture. The other thing, they would mellow. The first thing, they fracture, as the Egyptian example clearly demonstrates, where the Muslim Brotherhood, a leading member of the Muslim Brotherhood, is now a candidate for the presidency, despite the fact that the Brotherhood had placed an order that the Brotherhood will not contest the presidency. And he is becoming the darling of a part of, at least, of the liberal forces in Egypt. There is a generational struggle within the Brotherhood between the younger and the older elements. There, the Wasat party, the center party, literally, that has broken away from the Brotherhood, which is the more liberal wing, in a way, of the Islamist movement, is a third example. So the Brotherhood is fracturing in all sorts of ways. The example of their mellowing, of course, Al-Nahda, Rashid Ghannouchi, if you read Rashid Ghannouchi's statements day in and day out, it is very, very clear how once you come close to the corridors of power and you have to think about building coalitions in order to become a part of the governing the governing coalition, you have to build all these alliances, how they mellow. But even before, 10 years before the Ghannouchi phenomenon, you saw this in Turkey, when the AK party emerged out of the older Necmettin Erbakan-led party, various names, not because he wanted to change names, but he was forced to do so, and emerged as a party that, in order to come to power, in order to build a broader coalition, had to make major fundamental changes. And this has happened all around the Muslim world, where you see democratic openings take place, where ideological purity is sacrificed at the altar of political pragmatism. And this is all for good, because this is how, without political pragmatism and with ideological rigidity, democracies cannot operate. But this is another myth that's been excluded. So these are changes that have taken place that are finally being noticed, and people do sit up in Washington, New York, and hopefully in London and notice these changes. But that's as far as, I'm sure even my 45 minutes are running out. Let me stop at the changes at this point and move to the continuity. The continuities that I see, and this is again particularly Egypt is a good example, that regimes do not change or are not overthrown overnight. Mubarak may have been overthrown, but the structure of the regime, with the corporate interests of the army underpinning, of the military underpinning it, continue to remain in place. The day after Mubarak fell, I published an article on the website of Foreign Policy, which I had titled, "The Tyrant is Dead, Long Live the Military," which obviously comes out of the British. The king is dead, long live the king. And the military has portrayed, I mean, has demonstrated its staying power, but not merely its staying power, but its will to stay in power, although it has made certain concessions. And again, the example of Turkey is very interesting. I argued in that article that it took 60 years, if you took 1950 as the point of departure, the first democratic elections in Turkey, it took 60 years for Turkey to finally be able to impose civilian rule over the military. And even now there are some people who doubt that that is a foregone conclusion, but I think it is. I think the democratic consolidation in Turkey has reached a point where that process is irreversible. So you cannot expect the army with all its corporate interests, the military with all of its corporate interests, to buckle under and give in to democratic movements. In Tunisia things were a little different, but and the difference between Egypt and Syria, for example, is that in Egypt the military was able to distance itself from Mubarak for a number of reasons, including the fact that they had over the years resented Mubarak's attempt to impose his son as a successor. And there were a whole lot of other reasons. But in Syria, given the nature of the Syrian military and the fact that almost 80% of the officer corps in Syria is Alawite, and its sort of relationship with the Assad regime, the military would find it very difficult to dump Syria. So there, when the Syrian regime goes, the military will have to go down under with it, and that's why the resistance to change in Syria is so fierce, because the military and security apparatus knows that it's a choice between being in Palestinian territories, the 22% of Palestine that was not occupied in 1948. It's a reference to the innate nature of the Zionist settlement in Israel, which was the same, which followed the same pattern, more or less, of European settlements in North America or in Australia or New Zealand. And this is the reason why, this is one of the fundamental reasons why you find so much empathy in North America or in the Western world in general with Israel, because Israel has been basically repeated the same experiences that the North American, that European colonies in North America or in Australia and New Zealand had undergone in the 18th and 19th centuries. And that continues. Now, this doesn't mean that I challenge the right of Israel to exist as a state, and Israel is now a given in the heart of the Middle East. But even though it is, it has to come to terms with the fact that people in the Middle East do not consider it to be a part of the Middle East. It's in the Middle East, but not of the Middle East. And its policies towards the occupied territories makes it even more difficult for them to accept that. There is another aspect that will continue, and this is, in a way, justifies, at least to some extent, the apprehension in the West about the rise of political Islam. And there is no single political Islam, obviously. I mean, I've argued this in my books and articles and so on for a long time, that political Islam is not a monolith, it's very highly contextualized, and there are different forms, different faces of political Islam. But there is one thing that, in a way, particularly in the Middle East, gives a certain degree of unity to the ideology generally considered to be political Islam. And that is its resistance to hegemony. I don't want to go into details of that, but there's been a long history going back to the middle of the 19th century with the beginnings of European colonialism in the Middle East and elsewhere in the Muslim world, where Islam has been used as a vehicle for opposition or resistance to colonial encroachment and colonial rule. And some of that baggage is still carried by the Islamist movements in these countries. And that's the reason why there is such a degree of apprehension in many of the Western capitals about political Islam. Not because it forces people to wear clothes that might appear to be outlandish and so on and so forth. I mean, those are superficial reasons. The real reason is that political Islam, despite its different manifestations, has in the final analysis a certain potential to act as an anti-hegemonic force in this part of the world. And that continues, and that's the other continuity that I wanted to share with you. The third, how much time do I have? 5 minutes. The third, well, that's about right. The third, it's 5 and not 5 or 45 or 5. Okay, that's the third and last point I wanted to make, which is the role of regional powers in the Middle East itself and vis-a-vis the global powers. And here, Turkey and Iran, I argued it in one of the articles that is published simultaneously in Inside Turkey and Middle East Policy recently, that the future of the Middle East will be determined not so much by what happens in Riyadh or Cairo, but in what happens in Ankara and Tehran. Because Iran and Turkey are the regionally preeminent powers, Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, Iran in the Persian Gulf. And I don't have the time to go into the details of why I consider them to be preeminent regional powers, but they have both the hard power and the soft power. Turkey much more of it than Iran, but Iran has the hard power in terms of its location and oil resources. And because thanks to the United States, the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 and the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Iranian security environment has vastly improved. Once you get rid of the Taliban and get rid of Saddam Hussein, then obviously Iran becomes a major player, both in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and is able to exercise that influence to promote its interests. I would finish merely by just mentioning two things. One is the issue of the Iranian nuclear aspirations. I'm not technologically qualified to make a determination as to whether the Iranians are really on the way to the bomb and how long it will take for them to get there. But to me it makes eminent sense that they would be attempting to acquire a capability, a nuclear capability, that would act as a deterrent force, given their geostrategic location. With a nuclear-armed Russia to the north, which has not been terribly friendly, with a nuclear-armed Israel to the west, which is hostile, with a nuclear-armed Pakistan, which despite the superficially good relations between Iran and Pakistan, the Iranians consider to be a pawn of the United States, and both the conventional and unconventional armada that the United States has deployed in the Persian Gulf to the south. So it makes eminent sense that some people in Tehran will be thinking of the nuclear option as a deterrent. I don't think this immediately impacts on Turkish interests, although some people think it does, because I don't think Turkish-Iranian interests in the long run diverge so much that one can build a conflict scenario. But I think this again with the reference to what you must be seeing in the press in the last couple of days about the installation of the missile shield in Turkey by NATO and the Iranian reaction to it and the differences over Syria between Tehran and Ankara. I feel that since Turkey and Iran are, in a way, as far as I'm concerned, bound to emerge as the major regional powers, as American hegemony in a way recedes because of some of the wrong moves that the United States has made in the region and imperial overstretch. In a way, it's extremely important that both Ankara and Tehran exercise caution as well as invest a great deal diplomatically to see that the relations between Iran and Turkey remain on an even keel, because that is the secret for the next several decades for stability and prosperity in the Middle East. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, which looked at really various aspects of the changes taking place and the role of Turkey and Iran that might shape some of the developments. in the region. As I told you, we have no problem with this. It doesn't work.
It doesn't.
Did you turn it off?
I turned mine on.
It doesn't like me. Well, anyway, I hope you can hear me. I don't know where it is. Yeah, that's better. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Well, I would like to thank three speakers for their presentations. Although they have all each spoken 20 minutes, and I would like to thank all of them really for using time effectively, but still we are 15 minutes, somehow we lost the time. I don't know, I think that's my mismanagement of the time. So when there's a mismanagement, there's an authoritarian tendency. Now we can have 15 minutes question and answer session. Please introduce yourself, be precise so that we can have time for discussion. Please. Do we have microphone, guys?
Thank you very much, Talib.
It doesn't work either. Now.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
Well, let me start by saying that I just wanted to say the word that if you
Yeah, it works. It works. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's right.
I just wanted to say that Talib, don't worry that the microphone doesn't like you because we like you, so you
It's very
understand.
kind.
And thank you very much for the coordination. At the same time, I got one question from Bill and a couple of comments for Mohammed and also Tal. Let me start by Mr. Mohammed. Well, thank you very much for the expose. At the same time, I want to thank you for mentioning the different issues on the Middle East and the North Africa, the Arab countries, and also the relation between Iran and Turkey. I know the kind of beautiful relation that we have. I mean, with them. First of all, maybe I should have introduced myself. My name is Karimian. I'm the Minister Counsel from the Iranian Embassy. And the kind of beautiful relation that we have with Turkey, this is something that us from now on, things will be happening in Tehran and Ankara. They are the two major countries and players in the region. And although I know any time the relation between the two countries will get better and better, there are third parties that they do not like it, but somehow, since you mentioned something about the nuclear issue, we have been repeatedly saying that it is for peaceful purposes, never mind what the other says, but at the same time, it is so ridiculous that the countries around us, nobody talks about Israel. Israel does have the atomic bombs from long, long back, and Iran is a member of NPT, Israel is not.
Can we concentrate on the topic?
Yes.
Because you are moving to a different territory.
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible. So this is our right. I just wanted to say that this is the right of Iran and this issue. And I just wanted to make one comment that you said about if Bashar Erdogan says something and everybody says he is an Islamist Prime Minister, but never mind whatever Mr. Bush says. And it is just like that if you see a committed Muslim lady and if you see a nun in the United States, if they see the nun, they say, oh, the lady is so committed. But when it comes to a Muslim, they say, oh, she is so backward and reactionary. And one point to what Taha said regarding the Americans, they are sick and tired of Israelis' attitude, and they're not ready to pay anymore about the cost that the Israelis, they are making troubles in the region, which is very right. And thirdly, I've got a question for Bill, which is, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think would be the biggest problem for Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East? Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's have more questions and comments. This gentleman, and then to the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Thijs van der Plas. I'm from the Netherlands Embassy, and I have a question to all three panelists about the Turkish leadership role in the region. Obviously, Turkey claims this role of a regional leader, and Minister Davutoglu explains to us all the time that Turkey will exercise that role through the use of soft power. Through trying to convince the players in the region, to keep all the avenues of communication open with them, to bring them to the table, to lead by example. But recently, that soft power approach is showing its limitations. Gaddafi didn't listen to the arguments of Davutoglu. Assad has stopped listening to the Turkish government. And Ahmadinejad and the Ayatollahs in Tehran are less and less responsive to Turkish arguments. And if you want to be a real regional leader, if your soft power approach doesn't work anymore, you have to shore it up with hard power, with sanctions, ultimately sometimes with intervention. And my question to the panelists is Turkey, the present Turkish government, willing and able to do that, to use hard power if soft power doesn't work anymore? I'll give you my own expectation based on recent history. I'm doubtful whether the Turkish government will do that. You saw when certain NATO allies decided that in Libya we needed to use hard power because soft power wasn't working anymore. The Erdogan government was less than enthusiastic in the beginning. Turkey is still resisting sanctions against Iran because they think they can convince Iran through arguments. Turkey was rather late with contemplating sanctions against the Assad regime. So recent history seems to suggest that the Turkish government is rather hesitant when it comes to the use of hard power. But I'd like to have the view of the panelists on that.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman at the back, please.
Thank you, Assistant Galip, Assistant Researcher at SETA. My question is for Bill Park. It seems that there is both conceptual and political confusion about what's going on in the Middle East. But at the same time, there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut answer from this point. G8 has promised financial assistance, but so far little has been materialized. And also European Union talked about a new Marshall Fund, but so far nothing has materialized. And there is a great deal of talk that Turkey cannot be a model. It might not be. But at the same time, it doesn't seem to be neither US nor Europe, nor any other major power has any answer to what's going on in this part of the world. Like in the case of Eastern European Revolution, there was a return to Europe and a European anchor. From this point of view, what is your thought on the way out? Do you see any possible solution? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think, Bill, we should start with you. Again, the same order. We don't change order, you see. We follow the same order.
I can't answer the question, what is Turkey's biggest problem in the Middle East? There's hundreds of them, and they seem to change on a daily basis. I really can't answer that. Soft power, for me, soft power, Turkey's soft power, that is the society-to-society relationships, that element of it, is long-term, I would guess, pretty positive over the long term, both for Turkey and for the region. But that kind of exercise of power cannot bring immediate effect. And what it seems to me has happened is that sort of exercise of soft power, the media relationships, the trade and so on, has come up against a major challenge that it's simply not designed or able to deal with. So the issue then is, what does Turkey do next? I don't like the idea, I don't agree with the idea that Turkey should therefore contemplate hard power. It seems to me another element of Turkey's soft power was this idea of mediation between peoples in the region. And for all sorts of reasons that we know and we understand, Turkey has moved from that situation or been dislodged from it. And I think that's really quite difficult because, and let's just not talk just about the Middle East, but the region more generally. You can't easily embrace Armenia unless you first square it with Azerbaijan. you can't be friends with both Russia and Georgia if those two countries go to war, and Georgia now is a little bit less trustful of Turkey than it was before. So it's the same in the Middle East. You have Davutoglu who's saying to Iran and Saudi Arabia, pull it over Bahrain. You know, you have Turkey, first of all, talking to Assad on the assumption that he would listen, and then switching to an opposition that might not win, at least in the immediate future. So for me, if Turkey wants to exercise that kind of diplomatic soft power, its better position would be to not take sides, to try to bring sides together. That's what it set out to do, was meeting some degrees of success in doing, and I think would be better advice to stick to now. But actually, for all sorts of reasons that I understand, and sometimes even sympathise with it, Turkey's not doing that. And the result, I think, is that Turkey starts to fall out with countries in the region, or peoples in the region, in the same way that everybody else does. Which I suppose brings me to the third question: what can we do about the Middle East? Wait, I think. Because, you know, politicians have short-term parameters. They feel they have to engineer and make something happen now. It seems to me the grand sweep of history is that, actually I like a recent State Department official that I was speaking to recently, US State Department, he said, we screw everything up. The Americans were getting a lot of criticism. He says, we screw everything up. He said, all you can say though is that we screw things up differently from the way they would have been screwed up otherwise. And I think that's a fair sort of observation, not only about US policy, but about the way the world works. Politicians seek to engineer outcomes. Well, they can make a difference to the outcome, but I don't think the historical record proves that they improve the outcomes. So we can throw money at Middle Eastern regimes that may or may not appreciate it, and may or may not be corrupt with it, or may not fall as a consequence, or prosper as a consequence. We can support democratization, but it might not happen. We can support regimes in power, and then the people will dislike us. And I just think this is just history working its way out. Politicians will try to engineer things, but things will work out the way they work out. Maybe a different kind of mess from the one that we would have got if they hadn't tried to engineer things. So I don't think there's any easy solution to Middle East problems, or indeed other problems. Politicians, statesmen, governments are bound to act. My most general advice, it's the advice I gave to Turkey, but I suppose it's the advice I would give to the US, my own government and all the rest of it, is tread very carefully and very rightly. Don't invest too much in any one outcome or force, because that might not be the outcome or the force that you find yourself dealing with. By the way, as we have an Iranian representative here, I would say that about US policy towards Iran as well. I think the US switched far too hard in its dealings with Iran. Clearly Iran was going to be difficult for the US. But they took it too far and closed down all the scope for dialogue, and it would have been better if they hadn't done that. So that would be my general observation. But I don't think there's a solution out there waiting for Obama or anybody else to come along and give it up.
I also comment about this soft power question. First of all, you don't have some consecutive policies, and first soft power, then hard power, at the middle smart power. It's not happening like that. What soft power was just an instrument. If you have channels to use it, you can use it. But if you don't have, you cannot use it. Simple as it is, and it's usually helpful in this neighborhood. And Turkey had some kind of capital regarding soft power, and they used it. And if you just check the Syrian example, it was a very interesting experience. While everybody was pushing for isolation, Turkey rejected that idea and opened a channel to Syria through Turkey to the rest of the world. But the West, especially US, was not able to use that channel. Another story. But at the end, it was a 7-8 years relationship, a collateral damage for the Syrian regime, because it was a win and lose case for Syrian Assad regime, and it was a win-win relation for Turkey. Assad did not understood, I think, the regime, Ba'athist regime over there, having this much interaction with Turkey, one way or another, transforming his society, expectations, and etc. So this kind of power provided Turkey, I forgot to mention when I was talking about Arab effect on Turkey. Today we are having a Syrian opposition forming a platform, not in France, not in Britain, or not in Iraq, whatever, but in Turkey. These are the direct sort of products of how you use soft power. Libya case, entirely different case. There are at least 10 different dimensions regarding Libya. It's true that there was a sharp policy change happened regarding NATO, but there was plenty of proxy wars taking place through Libya. Turkey was at the same time talking, struggling with Gaddafi, but at the same time France, Britain, etc., etc. Not an easy example. But if you just plainly read it, you may be right. But at the end, what's important is how you're going to balance your policies regarding this soft power and hard power. And that hard power thing is not a thing which we are not accustomed to. I mean, just 11 years ago, in 1999, late 1999, Turkey started military exercise in the Syrian border. We were almost getting into war. So this is not the first time we're getting very tensions regarding Syria. Iran knows that very well, Turkey knows, Syria knows, so we are somehow used to that thing. So, I mean, do not expect, we were not able to solve a problem, jump to next step, which is military action, which has been done by US regarding Iraq. Nobody was expecting Saddam to defeat US Army, and the results are over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let me also start by the soft power, hard power dichotomy sort of thing. I don't think that if you look at the history of international relations, if you are unable to use it, that if regional powers are unable to effectively use soft power, they immediately decide that they have to use hard power. That's not a given. Secondly, I think there is a mix-up here. When we refer to regional powers, we must distinguish between regionally predominant powers and regionally preeminent powers. I think it's not merely a semantic difference. A regionally predominant power is one that has the military capability to force its will, military and other capabilities, to force its will on other members of a region. A regionally preeminent power is one that has to, that is demographically, industrially, militarily, and so on and so forth, and in terms of its political system, further ahead, has the capacity to influence other regional powers by persuasion, by example, to some extent even by military threats, but it doesn't really mean that it has the capacity, the hard power capacity to that extent that it can hit people on the head and say, now you have to do so. And I will further add to that, and particularly in the case of Turkey, that a prudent regional power, or a prudent regionally preeminent power, does not use its hard power for objectives that other parties want to pursue. Turkey would use hard power, as other regional powers, preeminent or predominant powers do, to pursue its own objectives and interests. Turkey has no interest in imposing sanctions on Iran, and I'm sure Minister Karimian would agree with that. Because as far as Turkey is concerned, it's against Turkey's national interest to do so. Just because there is a resolution in the United Nations, which is obviously dominated by a certain group of powers, it doesn't mean that Turkey is going to sacrifice its own national interest just to toe the line. And that is a sign of being a mature regional power, rather than saying that it doesn't have the power to be a regional one. And finally, one last point. I think one of the major ways in which a regional power signals, or a power signals that it has become a regional, that it is becoming or has become a regionally preeminent power, is to demonstrate its commitment to its own strategic autonomy. That it is not going to take orders. And I say this with some confidence because I come from India, so I know the Indian logic, which is a very strategic logic, which is very much the Iranian strategic logic, which is coming now to become very much the Turkish strategic logic. That it is not, that its commitment to strategic autonomy is absolute.
and that it cannot be forced to take positions or adopt policies just because other powers dictate it to do so. That Turkish foreign policy is determined in Ankara, not in Washington, London, or Paris. And I think this was demonstrated. And again, my wife always tells me that I shouldn't be advertising my own articles. But I wrote it. Talib read this piece because he responded to me. I published an article in The Guardian, in the op-ed pages of The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, in which my punchline was that the Turkish decision to expel the Israeli ambassador was a demonstration of its declaration of its declaration of independence in the arena of foreign policy. And you know independence from whom?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank 3 of our speakers today, and I think that we come to an end. I have read the book written by Professor Ayub, and this is now on our reading list in my PhD course. I'm pleased to announce that, and Bill Park has already published a book. It just came out, I think, with Routledge. It's on Turkish foreign policy, and I think these are all welcome books. And I would like to end this meeting with an announcement. SETA is running a number of projects. One of them is coming to a conclusion. This is something I think the audience will be interested in. It's about the EU perception of Turkish foreign policy, whether EU elite or the policymakers are looking at the Turkish foreign policy on the basis of axis-shift or something else. We are going to release a report in 2-3 weeks, and hopefully we will have a meeting of this sort here to discuss Turkish foreign policy again. So please join me in thanking our speakers, and again, I'd like to thank you for being here with us today, and hopefully we will see you again sometime later.